We're coming to you from the Dubai Cloud and Data Center Convention 2024, and joining me now is Mr. Milan Radia, founder and CEO of ConnectedCompute. Welcome to W.Media, sir.
Thank you, Deborah. Pleasure to be here.
So let's begin by talking about your vision for what constitutes a robust and reliable connectivity infrastructure.
So I think the connectivity landscape is evolving pretty fast. We've seen, I think, something transformational happen over the last few years, which is the subsea cables have become absolutely dominant in terms of transmitting IP traffic around the world. And one of the changes within that landscape has been the dominance of the OTTs, so the cloud and content platforms such as Google and Meta and others, in terms of really driving that infrastructure rollout and expenditure. Now within that, what that creates, it creates a whole series of complexity and challenges around that, but now where we're heading towards an era of far greater machine to machine. So that creates quite an overload on the system. It creates a lot more requirements for rigor, performance, latency, in order to service these kind of mission critical applications that are coming out of this. So the vision, I think, is really to see hubs that can deal with all of this. So in every market, there will be these centralized hubs where all of this traffic exchanges is located, the SLTs of subsea cables, those termination points, the internet exchanges, and the core nodes, on-ramps and off-ramps of the cloud platforms. I think that's the end game, to really maximize the impact on the environment in terms of cost, user experience and performance.
Speaking of subsea cables, what is your assessment of the subsea cable infrastructure in this region, Middle East and North Africa? It's growing
fast. There are many cables that have landed already and many more to come. And we've seen that becoming actually quite productive. So, and we're actually seeing extensions. So, SDC are busy expanding the presence of the to Africa cable into the Gulf region. And it's starting to have an impact. Clearly, the region is quite dependent in terms of subsea cable connectivity to the rest of the world. And we're seeing that productively used. And what I mean by productively used is that the interfaces between the subsea cables and the domestic connectivity infrastructure in many countries is quite well evolved. So the UAE is a very good example where they've configured transit zones, they've configured good levels of peering within the internet exchange infrastructures and so on. And so that's really translating into great connectivity experience for consumers and enterprises. That's not the case in all countries, and some of the smaller countries are now starting to play catch up. As more cables land, they're starting to understand how they really leverage that connectivity in their markets.
But in the age of AI and high performance computing, do you think there is a lot of pressure now on connectivity infrastructure, and how do you see this pressure being alleviated in the future?
I think there's a game changer coming, because people talk a lot about AI and they talk about the large language models, the large scale compute deployments that are going to be needed to cope with that. Of course that's happening. We've seen dramatic expansion in terms of capacity in markets such as the US. That's now happening in the European region and Asia. The AI inferencing part of that creates a whole different set of challenges, right? So this is where you and I are interacting with ChatGPT, with Copilot, etc. And we're expecting some relatively quick responses. We're asking a whole series of different queries, we're expecting instant responses, and in fact we're expecting not just textual responses, we're expecting entire slide decks to be created, entire images and video clips to be created by the AI platform. Now, these are latency sensitive, but actually quite high bandwidth type services. And the data centers need to catch up, is a simple fact. The fiber connectivity is there in most markets, the subsea cable connectivity is there. What is not quite in place just yet is the real depth of understanding within the data center community of really what a mission critical high performance connectivity infrastructure looks like. It's not just a couple of carriers, 2 or 3 carriers coming into the data center. It's something much more diverse, much more rich. It's a real peering hub that brings together all of the machine to machine, all of the on-ramps and off-ramps, as I said, and that is going to be critical to really solving this AI conundrum and giving them the performance they need to the platforms.
When it comes to connectivity, another huge nightmare is outages, and those have been happening rather frequently. We saw one in Singapore, somebody cut cables in France. So things can get unpredictable, things can happen suddenly, and I was wondering if you have an idea for sort of a plan B or a plan C in situations like these.
So you're absolutely right, and look, Africa was very heavily impacted as well by cable cuts and so on, and obviously we've seen various concerns that it could be a terrorist subject to a terrorist attack in some regions as well. So there are 2 or 3 consequences to this. I think number one, the subsea cables themselves are looking for resilience. Now that can come through more capacity and sharing of capacity. So if you look at some of the big cables that have come to bear, maybe it's to Africa pairing with Equiano, which is the Google cable, to create a more resilience amongst that cable community. Number 2 is obviously terrestrial. And so we're now seeing some large terrestrial fiber projects that are looking to circumvent some of the subsea routes which are inland. Now that's expensive, it requires substantial investment, and it's going to be multi-country led. But the governments fully understand that they can't be beholden to the challenges of these kind of subsea cable outages. So we're actually involved in some of these projects where we're certainly seeing significant appetite to put in place parallel terrestrial fiber type infrastructure. But some of the easy decisions are, replicating SLTEs, maybe coming up with adjacent country type deployments for cable landings. And we're seeing some of the big cable operators and consortia starting to do exactly that now, where they may have decided to service 3 or 4 countries from one landing. They're now looking to perhaps multiply those landings and put one in each of those countries, where those countries are significant scale.
So when it comes to digital infrastructure in that case, it's always important to make sure you build in the right place. All the infrastructure has to be built in the right place. Do you think we're building infrastructure in the right place in this region, in the Middle East and North Africa?
Yes. So look, I think it depends on your business model. I think the data center operator needs to be very clear at the outset what is the customer segment that they want to focus on, okay? In broad terms, and which part of the curve do they want to be on in terms of retail, wholesale, hyperscale? Obviously those 2 are converged within that. Are they a co-location play? Are they building to suit for the hyperscalers? And there's a curve which is reflecting of factors of commoditization, barriers to entry, the ability to differentiate in terms of pricing, and ultimately returns. And I'm not sure that the regional operators have necessarily paid enough attention to history, because we don't need to reinvent the wheel in this market. If you look at Europe, you look at the US, there have been some very, very clear trends. And there's a reason why some of the most valuable campuses on the planet are those which have the highest density of connectivity. Telehouse in London, Science Park in Amsterdam. There's a reason for that, because that's where every single content platform, every single cloud platform that has any kind of mission critical requirements, that's where they gather. They want to be there. In the end, the infrastructure cost is only going to be a very manageable and small element of their total service cost, right? So why wouldn't they eliminate network risks and so on by being at the epicenter of that connectivity ecosystem? So I think there's a little bit of a way to go in my view, and I may be at one end of the opinion spectrum. I think there's a little bit of a way to go before the operators really understand how they configure their campuses to really maximize long-term value and long-term barriers to entry by leveraging those type of connectivity ecosystems.
Now let's move on to the investment climate. What is your assessment of that here in the Middle East and North Africa?
I would say, certainly, look, I think in the Middle East it's quite vibrant. There's a lot of capital. And in fact, we're actually working with funds that have been investing elsewhere, have now made a decision, and they're from the region or certainly have a presence in the region, are now looking to bring capital back to the Middle East because they see that there are opportunities for premium returns. Clearly, they don't necessarily know exactly how to go about it and where to go forward at this stage, but certainly I don't think there's a shortage of capital. What I think there may be is a shortage of proven operational capability, both in terms of deploying within budgets, on time, to the right levels of quality that appeal to the target customers, and maybe the ongoing operational capabilities once the data center is up and running. Those elements, there is, I think, a little bit of a skills and management shortage in some of these areas. That'll get closed over time. Clearly there's a large influx of talent, but it takes a little bit of time to for that to converge, in my view.
I see. So finally, this is the second time you have come to Dubai CDC.
It is.
What's your experience been like? Today you were in a panel as well. Could you describe to us your experience?
I think it's been very positive. I think this event seems quite a lot larger than last year, which I guess is good news for you guys. I think, look, for me, it comes down to, I go to a lot of these events, I present at many of these events. I think it comes down to a few things: the quality of the attendees. Here I always tend to meet, good senior colleagues and senior level representation. So it's good discussions that we have. The panels are well moderated. We have a large audience, which is always nice. And the topics are always relevant and kind of interesting. And today's panel, moderated brilliantly by Stephen Beard from Knight Frank. We had Amol from Microsoft. Really good quality discussion, which I found quite enjoyable. So thank you for that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for this interview.
Pleasure. Take care.